This is Cadence Wilmoth, and today is February 24th, 2018. I am interviewing Miss Shirley Haworth. This interview is taking place at the home of Miss Haworth in Jamestown, North Carolina. This interview is sponsored by the Museum Studies Graduate Program at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, and is part of the UNCG Polio Hospital Oral History Collection. My first question for you is, could you tell me where you grew up and a little bit about your childhood?
Okay, I was born in High Point, North Carolina, and spent most of my life until I married on what is now Eastchester Drive in High Point. It was in the country at that time, so I went to the county schools for the first 8 years, and then graduated from High Point Senior High School in 1953. Yeah. Met my husband while we were in high school. We dated through 4 years at Guilford College, so I was dating him during the period of time that I was in the hospital for polio. What else can I tell you? I had one brother. I came from a working class family in a neighborhood that was very close-knit. When you played in our neighborhood as I was a child, the mother that you were closest to took responsibility for you, and you followed her directions. There were no questions asked. It was just a traditional, comfortable, happy period of my life. I had cats, I had dogs, we raised cows and pigs and chickens and geese and ducks and had a big garden, so my life was pretty much, I guess you would say as a child, a rural life. And I've continued to live in Guilford County, though I have spent some time away from this immediate area, but not for very long.
In 1948, there was a big polio outbreak in North Carolina, and I believe about 2,500, there were 2,500 reported cases. Do you remember this polio outbreak, and how did it affect you? Did it affect family members?
I remember it very well. I would have been in the 8th grade at Oakview Elementary School, that was called at the time. We only had, as far as I can remember, one person in our immediate neighborhood who was affected by Betty Jo Haworth, and that was before we had the Central Carolina Convalescent Hospital. So when she was diagnosed and her parents sought treatment for her, they had to go to a hospital that was down close to Charlotte. I think it was between Charlotte and Gastonia. But that was the closest to us. As far as how it affected us, as children and young people, we were not allowed to attend any of the movie theaters. A lot of churches did not hold Sunday school classes for their young children. Big public gatherings for children were just off the map. We just were not allowed to do it because there was great concern about how contagious the disease was. And of course it was not understood very much at that time how it was spread. So big fear. And I have, since I was in the 8th grade, I have memories of that. I was supposed to be a delegate to the North Carolina 4-H conference that summer, and was all excited about it, had gotten a new uniform to go and everything, and it was canceled. So that was kind of typical for the events during that summer when things were so bad. This would have been about the time they started collecting funds for the polio hospital, because there was big concern that people were having to leave our area and they wanted a treatment facility closer to home. And in High Point, the High Point Junior Chamber of Commerce was the central group that was involved. At least that was the public face of it that I remember. And in downtown High Point, there is a bridge over the railroad tracks on Main Street, Knox Bridge, and they would set up every weekend. And since it was the junior chamber, they all had little chamber pots that they would stand in. As you drove by in the car with your family, they would flag you down, and people would roll down their windows, and the children would put their dimes and quarters or whatever. It was March of Dimes time, so they would put mainly dimes in. Collected a lot of money that way. I guess we had March of Dimes drives at school, in which the children in classes would bring in their dimes, and we would make contributions to the March of Dimes because they needed money to fund research and to be sure that people who could not afford some of the treatment facilities had ways of being having that provided for them.
So, can you tell me, then you went to Guilford.
No problems for me from
Okay.
then all the way through high school. I went to Guilford College, began in the fall of 1953, and on scholarships, and had an assignment to work with the registrar at Guilford at that time. And so when I started back for my sophomore year, the registrar, Miss N. Ira Lasley, asked if I would come to Guilford early to assist with the registration of transfer students and foreign students so that we could get them settled in and have orientation, get all of the paperwork done before the rush of registering for classes, understanding that at Guilford at that time we had about 650 students or so, so it was not like the big rush at a larger university, but there was not a large staff. So I went to Guilford a little over a week before classes began to help with that part of registration. And that's where I apparently picked up the polio virus. I was staying in Mary Hobbs Hall at the time, and Mary Hobbs Hall was a self-help dorm for young women. We did our own house cleaning and most of the cooking and whatnot. So in being there early, I had access to the kitchen to take care of my food needs while I was there because the cafeteria was not yet open. And the kitchen was being renovated, so screens were down and flies were all over the place. Whether that had anything to do with how I contracted polio, I don't know. But apparently I was there for the incubation period of the virus. Started classes that fall and attended the first week of classes, and then became very ill. Nausea, terrible, terrible nausea. That was followed by beginning to get really stiff. And had a roommate whose brother had polio during the earlier epidemic. And she kept saying to me, "Shirley, you remind me of Joe. You're sick just like he was, and your neck is getting stiff just like his," which was a little frightening to hear. I had been seen by the school nurse who came to the room to check on me and kept giving me Pepto-Bismol, which I couldn't keep down. Still don't like to smell anything with pepsin in it. And went to the college doctor who visited at certain days. at Guilford. All he did was take temperature and say it should soon be over. But my roommate continued to be very concerned, and she called my parents. And my dad came over after he got off of work, and I remember very vividly being wrapped up in a blanket and carried to the car by my dad. Mom thought if she could get me home and she could give me home cooking, everything would be okay. And there'd be nothing really to worry about. It'd all be settled. And so she fixed special things for me the next day. And each time I tried to eat and drink anything, I strangled. Could not drink water, could not drink milk. It was not a good situation. My mom did not drive, and my dad had gone to work, so she took care of me all that day until my dad got home, and she said, something's got to be done, what are we going to do? Well, fortunately, this was during the period of time that doctors would still make house calls. And so they called Dr. Flythe, who was our family doctor at the time, and he came to the house to check me out. And I remember him having me stand up and walk across the floor for him and come back, and then he kept checking my neck, and he had my mom get a glass of water for me to try to drink. And instead of going down my throat, it came out my nose. There was no way I could force it down. He had a conference with Mom and Dad. I didn't know at the time what the conference was, but he arranged for them to meet him at High Point Memorial Hospital's emergency room the next morning. And we went to meet him there. The way they could determine whether or not you had polio, I found out later that he had told Mom and Dad he suspected that I had polio. And the way they checked for it at that time was to give you a spinal tap and analyze the spinal fluid, and that's where they could make the determination. So, curled up in fetal position on the table in the emergency room and saw a big hypodermic needle sticking out of my back. Flew it off to the lab, and from there they put me in an ambulance, and it was straight from High Point Hospital to Central Carolina with my mom and dad following the ambulance in the car. I could look out the back window of the ambulance and see Mom and Dad. And behind Mom and Dad was a car with Bill Haworth driving it. So off we went to Central Carolina Hospital.
Can you tell me about your experience at the hospital? Like, what would a typical day have been like?
Well, it started off in isolation. So what they did was to put me into the isolation section of the hospital until the point at which I was not supposed to be contagious any longer. I think there's a period of 10 days or so that they figured you were contagious, so they backed it up to the time I began showing symptoms. And as well as I can remember, I was in isolation for 3 days. The isolation ward was also where they held critical patients who were in respirators, what the lay public called iron lungs. And there were 3 people there, 2 young men, and 1 little boy who was about 6 years old. His last name was Watson, and I kept up with him for a while. Isolation ward was an eerie experience. They had lights that were, I guess they were ultraviolet or something. They were kind of between a blue and a lilac color, so it gave the whole ward a kind of eerie appearance. It was supposed to be killing germs, I guess, or viruses. Anyway, I was there, iron lung, iron lung, iron lung, the three. Very concerning, because each of those was set at whatever breathing rhythm was needed by the individual inside. So you had the whoosh, whoosh, whoosh that were all at different pitches. And during this period of time, I was monitored by the nurses who were there. Dr. Truxler was the doctor who was assigned to me during the period of time I was in isolation. He came to check me out as soon as I was admitted to the hospital. And after that, I only remember seeing him one other time, but I was told by the nursing staff that he was on call 24 hours a day in case my swallowing was more compromised and it began to affect my breathing, and he would have to be there to give me a tracheotomy. So that was the first time I had been made aware that that was a possibility. I did find out also from Dr. Troxler that I had two forms of the virus. I had bulbar, which affects a part of the brainstem and affects your breathing and swallowing, and spinal, which affects the limbs. So for me, polio was throat, neck, right arm and shoulder, my chest and abdominal muscles, and my left leg. So it kind of went across my body. They did no major testing of me until after I was brought out of isolation. They did give me one thing to have next to my table in isolation that had, as I remember it now, it almost seems like a jar of some sort, but it was a container with water in it, with a glass beside it. And my first realization that I had any effect other than the swallowing was when I tried to pick that up to pour water, and I could not lift it straight up with my arm. So I knew something was going on, but thought that it was, my breathing still seemed to be okay, so it had to be something with my swallowing and something with my arm. At the end of the 3 days, the physical therapist came to get me and took me in for my first total muscle evaluation, and started with my upper body and found a lot of tightness in my back, weakness in my stomach muscles. And then she had me swing my legs off of the table and stand up. And she said, "Now I want you to walk to me." And I took my first step and my left leg collapsed, and that was my first indication that anything other than my arm was involved, my arm and my swallowing. So that's when my therapy began. The thing that I think back on now and think is very unusual is that there were no more. Once I finished up with the isolation period, I didn't see a doctor again while I was there that I can remember. It was all nurses and physical therapists who worked with us. And I guess it was because there was nothing else for a doctor to do. A doctor could have come, but what's he going to do? Look down my throat, take my temperature, which the nurses did and reported, I'm sure, because they had doctors who monitored the work that was going on here. but never saw the doctor again while I was there. What was a typical day like? Started early. We had a nurse who was happy as could be, and we nicknamed her Bedpan Annie because she showed up at 7 o'clock in the morning with a gurney and the bedpans for all of us on the ward lined up on the gurney. And she would hit the double doors, and all of those enameled bedpans would rattle together, and who needed an alarm clock? She was there. So Bedpan Annie got us started at that time of the day. Her job was a difficult one because we had some adults on the ward with me who could not lift themselves on a bed, so she had to be able to maneuver them. You don't want to know necessarily about all of these details, but the rest of us who were able to maneuver ourselves took care of that part of our day as best we could. After that, we had breakfast, and there were some people who were not able to feed themselves who had assistance from the nurses. Those of us who were able to feed ourselves had the trays as usual and took care of that. When we had finished our morning meal, then you got the chance to comb your hair and brush your teeth. But remember, this was during a terrible drought period in Guilford County, and so the water was rationed. And what we got for brushing our teeth was our toothbrush and some toothpaste and 2/3 of a glass of water. So you brushed your teeth and you rinsed and spit, but when that water was gone, that was your water for brushing teeth, and there was no more. As I think about it now, I remember whipping the toothbrush around in that glass to get the extra toothpaste out of it when I was finished. But the nurses were really good to us. They were cheerful, and they made sure that we were well taken care of. I don't remember much. The breakfast meals I remember, and as I think about it now, I don't remember lunch and dinner meals at all.
Interesting.
Really strange. During the day, the group of physical therapists we had would come at different times to get individuals to take in for therapy sessions. For me, it was doing what I could to keep muscles loose and supple, because your muscles begin to tighten and you don't like moving because polio makes your joints and your muscles very sore. It's the numbness is not there. The weakness is there. I'm going to have to cough. I'm sorry. This is one of the side of the after effects. This is a part of what I am assuming is post-polio. My voice is not as strong as it used to be. And I am finding that now I have some difficulty swallowing that I haven't had in the past. You might want to put this at the end, somewhere along the way as you edit. I also have weakness in my left leg now that has begun developing during the last year. So you don't get through with it. The physical therapy sessions for me consisted of work with my arms, keeping them limber and trying to strengthen them. There were no weights involved, but there were mainly just movement exercises. With the therapist's assistance, doing sit-ups to make sure that the stomach and abdominal muscles stayed as in as good a shape as possible. And then touching my toes while sitting up on the table to make sure that the muscles and tendons stay lengthened and don't begin to draw and shorten, which gave some of the people a lot of trouble, some of the polio victims. And the way the therapist motivated me was, when I started out, I could reach about halfway down my calf when I was sitting up. She said, think about home, visualize home on your toes, and when you can touch home, sitting up, touch home, you'll be ready to leave the hospital. So that was my task every day, was to work on trying to keep those muscles and tendons lengthened and strengthened enough, flexible enough to be able to reach my toes. When you were in the bed, there were protocols you had to follow. We think of the pillow being up at the head of the bed. For us, our feet had to be against the footboard. There was a solid board at the bottom of our beds, and our feet had to be flat against those footboards. And we had a block to put on each side of our feet at the ankle to hold our feet upright so that you didn't get splaying and stretching those muscles and tendons in the wrong way. And we all had to use knee rolls to keep the knees slightly bent. So the nurses would come in periodically during the day and would get you to go through a series of movements and then roll under the knees again and your feet in blocks. And if they came in and your feet were not in those blocks, you heard about it. Put your feet in those blocks, because sometimes you get so tired being in one position, you just wanted to do something different. And of course we were not supposed to. We slept that way. And when I finally got home from the hospital, I couldn't sleep with the pillow in its regular position at home. I still had to put my feet down at the foot of the bed. If we were stomach sleepers at night, the toes had to be over the end of the mattress at the foot of the bed, so that again, those legs stayed stretched out as much as possible. The other thing that we missed out on when I was there was having the luxury of the whirlpool baths, the warm whirlpool baths that were supposed to help with the soreness and the muscle stiffness. But they were not able to give those to us because of the drought. High Point's city water supply was sufficient to supply water to Greensboro, which was out of water for the town. And they laid a temporary pipeline all the way from High Point City Lake out what is now Wendover Drive, was then called Red Road, all the way into Greensboro to get water supply into Greensboro for the citizens of Greensboro. So the whirlpools could not be filled and used. Before the drought hit, as I understood it, patients who were there got two different kinds of therapy. They would get whirlpool time, and they would also get the warm blankets that they steamed and put over you, wrapped you in to help with the muscle soreness. For us, it was just the warm blankets that they brought in a big, it was on a flat, as I remember it, a flat dolly, huge, big metal kettle with these blankets. And if you've ever smelled wet wool, you can imagine what wet wool blankets, a whole ward full of wet wool blankets smelled like. I can smell wet wool now, and it still brings back memories. But it was a great time. It was a glorious smell, because to be wrapped up in those warm blankets was to get relief for a period of time. And they did that for us at least once every day. So your days were busy with the routines while you were there. We had a youngster who was school age, and so her teacher, she had a homebound teacher who was assigned to her, and she would come in to hold sessions with her during the week. She also worked with a young woman who was a couple of beds over from me, who spoke French, was married to an American young man. She was a beautiful young woman, and she came in to work with her on learning her English, learning to speak English. And it was during this period of time when I decided, while watching her, that her techniques of working with them fascinated me, and that it made sense to think about being a teacher. So this is really what led to what became my career once I finished college, moving on through master's degree and doctorate, and becoming a professor of teacher education students. So interesting nexus in my life, in which, you know, things that could be really bad produced good results for me. The other thing that I was told while I was there, when I first went into isolation, I kept getting shots, and it seemed like it was every 4 hours. It was probably not that frequent. But I got shots frequently during the day, and I was told that it was an experimental drug, an experimental therapy that they were using, that they thought would hold the paralysis or weakness of the muscles where it was when they began administering this therapy. I guess we'll never know whether it really worked or not, because they didn't follow up on any of that work, because the Salk vaccine began being distributed the following spring. So I just missed that. And we will never know whether the lightness of my case was because of the administration of that particular therapy, or whether I just had a case that didn't leave me paralyzed the way it did a whole lot of people. I was told that there was the very big possibility that when I married, I would not be able to carry children to term, because they expected my abdominal muscles to be weakened to the point that that would be detrimental. One son weighed 8 pounds and 5 ounces, the other weighed 8 pounds and 9 ounces, so that didn't prove to be a big factor for me as an adult after that time. I worked with a professor at UNCG in the School of Education who had polio during that 1948 epidemic, and was very weak on her left side as a result of it, had worn a brace at some time, and during the latter years of her life had to use a cane. And she used to say, when she asked me about it, she said, do people ever say to you, oh, you're so fortunate, you weren't left with very much effect? And I told her, well, no, people did say that to me, but it didn't bother me. She said, it makes me furious, because if I had really been fortunate, I wouldn't have had polio. So our perspectives were different. She was affected much more than I was, and always felt that she was limited in some of the things she would like to have accomplished because of that. So in that regard, I was very fortunate. I had good care close to home, and remain pretty active. I mean, Bill and I go work out 3 times a week with the Silver Sneakers group, so we're still kicking along pretty good.
That's wonderful. So you were close to home. How did you keep in contact with your family and loved ones like Bill, or how did that process work?
We were allowed to have visitors on weekends.
Okay.
No visitors during the week. And so, and I can't remember whether it was Saturday or Sunday. I think it was Sunday. But Mom and Dad and Bill would come visit me during those visitation periods. Had lots of cards. Had professors from Guilford College who wrote me notes. I was at that time, we had not declared majors, but I was thinking I was going to be a history major, and so I was up to my neck in history courses at that time. And one of my history professors, Dr. Algie Newland, who was known to be very strict and stringent professor, sent me a card and wrote me a note on it and said, I'm holding all the exams until you get back. I did take the course that I'd had to withdraw from. I did take the course from him later and aced it, so it was not all bad. But my professors were good to me in keeping in touch with me. I only missed one semester of work at Guilford.
When we talked earlier at the community event, you talked about the gurney races.
Oh,
could you talk more about how did you guys entertain yourselves?
Well, entertaining ourselves mainly was through talking during
Okay.
the daytime and learning about each other. Our ward, the women's ward, was divided into two sections, and the front sections, the first section that you came into was where the respirators and the rocking beds were located. And in the back section where I was, those of us who were there were more mobile. Some of us more affected than others, but none of us needing respirators in that section. And it was mainly those awful men and boys that did the gurney races. The nurses would come in, give us our dinner, and then get everybody settled in, and you're supposed to be all settled and quiet, and the nurses would go on break, and that's when gurney races happened. And gurney races, the more mobile ones would get somebody who could get up but was not very mobile up on the gurney, and the two of them would race down the hall till the nurses caught you, and then everybody was shooed back to bed again. But it was always great fun. Didn't do it very often. They'd tell the doctor on you. Not a good thing. Other than that, passing the day with the routines that went on all day, you didn't have to worry about being entertained. When you had to lie flat on your back, you could have a neck roll, but we did not have pillows. So you laid flat. There was not much reading going on for those of us who were in my situation. So I didn't do much reading except for magazines that I could hold up and read while I was lying down. You were allowed brief periods during the day when you could sit up for a few minutes and then back down again. Getting to know each other, finding out about families, talking about what we wanted to do once we got out of this place.
So Hurricane Hazel came, I think, around like the mid-October.
Toward the end of October.
Okay.
We could probably even look it up around here.
Okay. I think I looked it up and it hit, I think, the South Carolina, North Carolina border on October 15th, so it probably came here a little later.
A little bit later.
Uh-huh.
It worked its way across the state. And I had gotten home just before that.
Okay.
My big target, my big motivator with Home on the Toes, was to be home for my mom's birthday, which was the 13th of October.
Okay.
And I made it home for my mom's birthday. So I had been at home for a few days before it hit us. I remember it. We had pine trees in our yard, and I remember those pine trees switching and bending, and Mom was afraid they were gonna hit the house before it was over with. But for the people in the polio hospital, Hurricane Hazel was a good thing because it broke the drought, and it meant that they could go back, I would assume, to the full therapies that they had used before. It was quite an experience, and for those of us from High Point, a very traumatic one because we lost members of the community, students that I had gone to high school with. Parents went down to see Hazel and never came home again. So it was a rugged time. During that period of time, though, was getting into routine at home and being followed up by the home nurse, a Ms. Amin, and I can't remember her first name, Ameen, as I remember her name. But when I left the polio hospital, I was to go back for evaluations with the therapist there until she determined that I no longer needed it. They wanted to follow my progress. And the home nurse came to be sure that everything was still going okay, that I was doing my exercises at home, and that no difficulties were arising. I was not showing further muscle weakness or any relapse of any kind. I don't remember exactly how long she continued to follow my case. I don't remember. I know the regular periodic visits did not continue past about Christmas, but I do remember her being back to check on me again I want to say it was during my spring break, because I went back to Guilford on crutches for spring semester. And I remember being at home during the spring and Ms. Amin coming to check me out one last time. Don't remember any other contact from the polio hospital past that period of time.
So she completely cleared you, or how did
I assume she made the final report on me. If they gave, my parents may have had some kind of final report from her, I don't know, and I never found it in any of Mom and Dad's papers after they passed away, so I don't know where that stood. I assume that she reported probably back to, it had to be a county, I would assume some sort of county office. She would have been employed through the county, I assume, but I don't know that for sure. And being a late teenager at that time, it never occurred to me to really ask too many questions about it. So I took it as a matter of course.
So you already, I guess, answered this question in some ways, but if you have any more thoughts, how did having polio, as a college student, affect the rest of your life? Were there any other ways that you can think about?
Well, there were some benefits for me that first Christmas. I remember going Christmas shopping with Bill, in fact, as well as with my mother. And I was on crutches. It's interesting how quickly you can get through a crowd of people when you're on crutches. So Christmas shopping that year I couldn't carry the Christmas packages and the bags, but I could clear a path for us. And you could get across the street because cars would give you right of way when you started across the street on these strange. And I didn't have initially I had crutches, wooden crutches up under the arm, and had never thought about it before, but had to be instructed on the right way to use them before I was allowed to go home. And then you move. In case you're wondering about that, you move the crutches with the weakened leg and then follow through. So it was crutches forward with my left leg and follow through on my right leg. I graduated to what they called canes when I went back to Guilford, and these were like aluminum, lightweight aluminum. And they came up and had braces that fit around the arms. They didn't fasten, but your arm just fit into it. And so I had 2 of those canes that I went back to school with, and again knew how to use those. Before the semester was over, had graduated from having to use 2 and having somebody follow me around and carry my books, to being able to having to use only 1 cane, which moved with the weakened leg, and then could carry my own books again. Not able to participate in physical education in any way at that time, other than to follow through with my exercises. So I had to keep record of my exercises and turn that into my physical education teacher in order to get credit for my physical education course, my activities course that semester.
And this was the spring semester?
Spring semester of my sophomore year, yeah. So it would have been spring of 59. Is that right? No.
55?
No, 55.
Skipped a couple of years.
Oh, goodness. Can't do my math. Yeah, spring of 55.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Caused me to have to go to summer school. And could not, Guilford was very strict about the number of courses that you could take during a summer session. And so I did some and they didn't offer the courses that I really needed to take. It was not on the books for the summer, so I did some investigating and found that they had a geography course, the first half of U.S. history course, a children's literature course, and it seems like there was one more on the books. And they allowed me to take, it must have been those 3, they allowed me to take 9 semester hours of work in one summer session at High Point College, where they were offering these courses, which was a big help because I was able to complete a semester's worth of work during the summer. I can't remember what the 4th course was. Must not have been terribly important, but I got through them. I remember I know, it was a political science course because I was taking the history course and the political science course from the same professor. And now remember, we're talking about a summer school session here. He required 2,000 pages of outside reading in addition to the textbook in each one of those courses. I read my eyes bleeding that summer, just bleary-eyed, trying to get through all the required reading. But I made it. And I got that semester. So when I went back the following year, for my junior year, I entered with my class as a junior, which was a big relief and put me on tap to finish my program, and by this time I was ready to declare my major. And so finished up with an elementary education, or really a primary education major and a history minor, and a number of psychology courses, although I didn't have enough for a minor. But having the experience with the homeschool teacher who came and seeing the good that came out of that for the people who were involved, hooked into, I guess, what had always been a service orientation in my whole makeup. And the decision to become a teacher was certainly an outgrowth of the experience I had in the polio hospital. Had nothing to do with the virus, but certainly had something to do with the path that I chose for my professional career once I got out. Finished my program at Guilford College, and taught public school for 10 years before going back to UNCG for my master's degree in educational research and evaluation. From there, went back to teach school again, but stopped when my first child was born. Did not have a second one for 8 years, but during that period of time got my master's degree, and got a job at the recommendation of Dr. Burt Goldman, who was an education professor at UNCG. Got a job as a research assistant at the Center for Creative Leadership, doing support research for the leader of what was at that time the creativity program. That piece was later phased out, but worked with Dr. Irving Taylor there until I decided it's time to go back and study some more. And so with a 2-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 40-year-old, I went back to UNCG for my doctorate in curriculum and instruction. Have since done postdoctoral work at Northern Arizona University and at Ball State University. Taught on the faculty at UNCG for 10 years. Was coordinator of teacher education, as it was termed at that time. What I was responsible for, in addition to working with the elementary ed program, was arranging all of the field experiences for undergraduates and graduates in education at that time. So I had a nice staff of 2 that worked with me, and so I taught and did administrative work. Was approached by a former doctoral student and one of her colleagues, who were both at Catawba College at the time, and asked if I would consider leaving UNCG and going to Catawba College to design their graduate program in teacher education. Now, once you've studied curriculum instruction and you've worked in preparing teachers for the classroom, the thought that you could start from the ground up with a brand new program and help people to incorporate elements that you felt were essential for improved preparation of teachers, the draw was absolutely too much. And I left UNCG after 10 years and went to Catawba College and was there for the next 13 years until I retired in 1999.
Okay. All right. So why do you think your experience at the polio hospital and the polio hospital site as a whole is important for future generations to hear about and better understand?
Well, the story of the facility itself and how it came to be, I think, is a great illustration of how two municipalities, the people in two municipalities, can come together around an emergency situation and do extraordinary things for both of those municipalities, because the people who had the foresight to plan and to believe that it was possible to raise the funds to build that facility and get it staffed were amazing, I think. And it was exciting to know that you're going to be able to have access to that big scrapbook full of all kinds of wonderful information about those early days. I think that's an important lesson for seeing how people embrace civic duty. And I don't think we should forget that. It was also a facility that brought in people whose lives were in crisis at the time and gave them reassurance and therapy at a critical time when they needed it so desperately. That kind of thing needs to be commemorated, I think, for a county, for a community, for a city. I don't think those men and women who made all of that possible, or the nurses and doctors who so faithfully worked there, should be forgotten. It's a piece of history, an important piece of history to the people who live through it. I guess that kind of thing grabs me anyway. I am back on the board, but I am a past president of Historic Jamestown Society, and we oversee the maintenance and operation of Mendenhall Home Place, which is a 19th century Quaker homestead in Jamestown that we keep open for the public and conduct education tours for schools as well as for people who are interested in it. So I see the same kind of importance for Central Carolina Convalescent Hospital, the site, what it was before the hospital was there and what it became after, the way it was used, the way it's being used today. Those are important things, I think, for other generations to know about, just as I think it's very important for us to understand the lives of the people who populated Mendenhall Home Place and the ways in which they've reached out to affect not only our immediate area, its colleges and universities, but other places all the way across the country, from Minneapolis to Seattle and back again. Knowing how we impact people's lives, I think, is and how the people there impacted lives is very important, should be commemorated.
Is there anything else you would like to add to the interview?
I appreciate the fact that the UNCG program and you students have undertaken this. I think it's an important work, and whatever the products are that come out of it, all the way through the working with the people who are currently using it to the good of the community, is an important contribution to our area, and I appreciate that.
Yes, well, it has been an honor speaking to you, and we are very excited to be able to have your story and deposit it in the archives. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.